Alright, in this video we're going to discuss creating calculated columns in DAX. There's three different main areas that we're going to focus on here. We're going to first focus on functions for string manipulation, and then we're going to cover conditional and logical functions, and we're also going to cover navigation functions. So these are all three areas that we're going to focus here in the next few modules as we work through calculated columns. So we create calculated columns. We're going to do that using DAX expressions, of course. And you will see the results immediately both in your tabular model and your Power Pivot model or Power BI model, kind of synonymous, both of them are the same. And you'll see the results immediately when you define them. And the reason that we point this out is because there's a little bit of a difference here between calculated columns and calculated measures. Calculated measures, if you're working in the tabular model, you will see the results immediately. However, if you're working inside of Power BI Desktop, which probably most of you are, then you will not see the results immediately when you create calculated measures. You will not see them until you actually bring them into the report view and visualize them there. So it's important to just kind of point out the difference here. So calculated columns, you will see the results immediately when you define those calculated columns. There's a lot of different functions that you have available for string manipulation. We're not going to cover them all, obviously, but we're going to cover definitely the ones that are going to be the most popular. The format function allows you to really format text. So you can convert a date, for example. You can convert, probably the most applicable use case for the format function is to take dates and format them to a string value. And you can manipulate it so that it shows up in the format that you would like it to show up in. So it converts a value to a text according to the format that really you specify. And there are some general formats that have been set up, and there's some user-defined ones where you can define your own as well. Concatenate simply joins two text strings into one text string. It's essentially doing the exact same thing as the ampersand operator that I showed you in the last video. The only difference here is concatenate can only accept two parameters, whereas the ampersand operator you can just keep adding and adding and adding. So therefore, most of the time I typically go with just using the ampersand operator. However, using concatenate, the function does make your code a little bit more explicit and might make it a little easier to read down the road if you don't have a lot of nested concatenate functions inside of your code. You then have casing, so you can either make, the entire text string lowercase, or you can make the entire text string uppercase by using either lower or upper. And then we have trimming here. We have left, we have right, and then we have the trim function. Now left and right are going to work exactly like you think they're going to work if you've ever worked with the Excel language or you've worked with T-SQL or something like that. You're going to pass in a string value, and you're going to tell it how many characters you want to return from that string value, and it will return the left 5 characters or the right 5 characters. However many characters it is from the side of the expression that you want. The trim function simply trims any leading or trailing white space that you have inside of your string. So a little bit different functionality there, but the trim function will get rid of any of that leading or trailing white space. The mid function is going to return a string of characters from the middle of a text string. You're simply going to give it the starting position and the length. So in terms of like T-SQL, it's very similar to the substring function. For searching, we have the search and we have find. Search is going to return the number of characters at which a specific character or text string is first found, reading from left to right. Find does the exact same thing. So the difference between the two is that one is case sensitive, one is not. We'll talk about that here in the next video. Replace is going to replace part of a text string based on the number of characters you specify with a different string. So you can replace the first 5 characters. If you were to pass in the left function, you can replace the first 5 characters with an empty string if you would like to just remove those first 5 characters. Substitute does the exact same thing. The difference, once again, is one is going to be case sensitive and one is going to be case insensitive. In this case, substitute is case sensitive, replace is case insensitive. So probably most of the time you're going to go with replace unless you need it to be very case sensitive, and then you will go with substitute. As far as searching is concerned, search is case insensitive, find is the one that is case sensitive. So if you want it to be very specific and you want to go with case sensitivity, then you're going to use the find function. All right, so find and search. We want to find the starting position of a string. So if I'm looking for the starting position of, let's say, something like Mitchell, right? So if you were looking at my name and you wanted to find the starting position of the letter H, you would have to count that out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's what find does. Find and search are going to find the starting position of that character or that expression in a string. So it returns the value of 5. So a lot of times what you will see is find and search are used as parameters for other functions. Now, there's 3 parameters really that we have for what we're going to pass into find and search. Actually, there's 4. 2 of them are going to be optional. First, we want to find what is the text that we want to find. Then you have to pass in the text that you want to search. The start number here is optional. You could say that I don't really want to look at the first 2 digits of this because the first 2 digits are irrelevant, right? So maybe we know the first 2 digits could be something like whatever, and we know that those are irrelevant to what we're trying to do. So we're going to skip the first 2. So then maybe we start at the 3rd character and we search for the character string after the first 2. So we could skip that. The other one is what do you want to return if the value is not found? Now this is error handling essentially. Because previously, before 2012, you did not have this optional parameter. You would have to wrap the find or the search function. You'd have to wrap that inside of an isError function. Now, we haven't gotten to error handling yet. We will later on, either in this course or the advanced course. We'll talk about error handling and how to handle that using the error functions. But now, as of SQL Server 2012 and later, we have this 4th parameter, and we could say, okay, if you don't find the character that you're looking for, so if you don't find H, then go ahead and replace that with a 0 or with a 1, whatever it is, but we would replace it with a different value. Because if you don't replace it, if it doesn't find it, it will return an error and it will break your code. Okay, so those are your 2 optional parameters that you have for find and search. All right, so for the format function, the format function converts a value to text. And you can do this with numeric values and you can do this with date values. So we would specify specifically how we want to convert that value. How do we want to convert the numbers to text? How do we want to convert the date to text? And we can change the format of it while we're converting it to text. There's a couple different format options that we have. There are a lot of predefined format options out there. You can find them on MSDN. If you just search format DAX function MSDN, it'll go there. It will show you the predefined format functions. For example, if I was formatting a date, I could put in short date and it would give me the short date format, or I could do long date. So there's some predefined formats you can use. There's also this concept of user-defined formats where you can go in there and you could specify specifically the formatting that you want. So you could bring back the full month like January, or you could bring back just Jan, J-A-N, or you could bring back 01, or you could bring back just 1 for the month number. So you can format that however you want, and we'll go through a couple examples of that here shortly. It works on both numbers and dates and times, all right? So you can convert numbers and dates and times to a specified format that you want, and it also converts that to a text data type instead of a number or a date and a time. We then have the divide function. The divide function is very useful. This is one where you really want to use the divide function instead of the divide operator. So instead of just using that / to do your division, you want to use the divide function. The reason for that is because you could get a divide by 0 error. So the divide function takes 3 parameters. It takes a numerator, it takes a denominator, and then it takes an alternative result. And the alternative result is optional. If you don't specify anything for the alternative result, then it will actually return an empty string in the case that a divide by 0 error occurs. However, you can replace that optional empty string with whatever value you want. So you could say divide by 0 error occurred. You could put NA. You could put 0. So you could put a value that you choose into that column instead of returning an empty string. If you choose not to use the 3rd parameter, that's totally okay, but just using the divide function instead of the divide operator will help you to alleviate some of those errors that you might get from the divide by 0 errors. All right, so I would definitely use the divide function instead of the operator here in this example. All right, so that's it for the PowerPoint. Now we're going to jump back into Power BI Desktop, and we're going to create some calculated columns here for each of the different functions, not every function that we covered, but for the different groups of functions that we discussed here in the PowerPoint. All right, so now we're going to jump back into Power BI Desktop, and we're going to build out some calculated columns, reviewing some of the different functions that we just reviewed in the PowerPoint slide. All right, so back in Power BI Desktop, I'm going to navigate over to our data view over here on the left, and we're going to add in some new calculated columns. I'm going to start first with my customer table. So I'll come over to my customer table here, and I'm going to create a new calculated column. The way that we do that is we come up to the modeling tab at the top and then we click new column. Obviously, in the tabular model, it's a little different. You just right click on the column here and you can insert a column wherever you want, really, which is a lot nicer and easier functionality than Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop always adds your new columns over here all the way to the right. So there's a little bit of a difference between the two different tools, but in Power BI Desktop, we'll come up to the top and click New Column. Now, we can go ahead and give the column a name real quick. So we can call it whatever we want. I'm just going to name these columns very similar to the functions that we're working with. So I'm going to call this one function mid. And for the first one here, we're going to use that mid function. Remember, the mid function essentially returns a characters of string from a string based on a specified starting position and number of characters that we give it. So we return a portion of a string from an existing string. It works very similar to the substring function. And for this example here, I'm going to type in mid, open parenthesis. The great thing about DAX is it always gives you really good IntelliSense here. So it tells you what it expects as far as the parameters are concerned. And it also gives you a really good description of what it's looking for. So return a string of characters from the middle of a text string given a starting position and a length. Now, that's not completely true because you could return the first 5 characters of a string. But of course, we know that technically we would use the left function for that instead of the mid function in most situations. Now I'm going to hit Shift Enter. Shift Enter allows me to go down to the next line of code here. And then what I want to do is I want to bring from my customer table, I'm going to hit and open a single tick here. I'll hit single tick. It'll show me all the tables I have available to me. The only one we have right now is customer table. I'll hit tab, and then I'll hit an open bracket here and then start typing in customer. And then I'll hit tab again. And that's going to return what you see right here, which is customer name, the name of the customer. Then I'll hit comma, and then it expects the starting position. So that's the second parameter. The starting position is going to be 1, and then I'll hit Shift Enter again, and then the number of characters that I want to return is going to be 3 characters. So what this will return is for Tailspin Toys, it's going to return TAI. It's going to start at the first character, and it's going to return 3 characters returning TAI. When we get a little bit further down here to Wingtip, it's going to return WIN, and then there's some more customers down there, and they would also return the first 3 characters of the customer name. So I'll go ahead and hit Enter, zoom back out. We can navigate over to the right here, and then if we zoom in, we get TAI for Tailspin Toys, and if we go down, we would see WIN for the other company that was there as well. All right, so that is the mid function. I'm going to leave this one here. We'll come back to that in just a moment. So I'm going to create a new calculated column. This calculated column is going to be the search function. So I'm going to call this one function search. We'll zoom in there. And then I'm going to hit Shift Enter again just to keep my code formatted a little bit and easier for us to read. And then I'm going to say search. So the search expects, first of all, the text that I want to find. So I'm going to look for some text here. And then let me see what I want to find here. I'm going to look for the value of ILM. All right, so I'm going to look for the value of ILM here. And then I'm going to search inside of my customer name again. So I'm going to go to my customer table, and then the customer column. And then I have to give it a start position. Remember that these are optional. Notice that it also tells you here that search is not case sensitive. So unlike find, case is not case sensitive. I'm going to start at the first character here. And then if it doesn't find a value, remember that if it doesn't find a value, we want to specify a not found value here because that way it doesn't error out. So of course, if you're looking at this, we'll see a lot of customers don't have an ILM anywhere inside of their code. And so that it doesn't error out, we're going to put a 0 there as a default value. And then we can go ahead and hit Enter. Now what search returns is it actually returns the starting position of that character once it finds it. So how many characters into the code was that character? So if we go back over here and we zoom in real quick, we come in here, you can see that the second one did have an ILM and it was 27 characters in. That one had an ILM. So we could see all the ones that had an ILM and where the starting position was of that character or that text string that we were searching for. All right, so that's the search function. Another example that we're going to use here is we want to figure out the find function. So how does the find function work differently than the search function? So if I come back over here and look at my customer table, let me zoom back over here. Notice that in Tailspin Toys Sylvanite, we have a capital letter M. Now search is case insensitive. Find, on the other hand, is case sensitive. So we can compare these two side by side. So I'm going to add a new column here. This is going to be called my function find column. And then I'll hit Shift Enter to go down to the next line. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. So I'm going to type in find. Notice that the description there does tell me at the bottom, the last line of code says find is case sensitive. So it does let you know. And then we're going to look for ILM again. So I'm going to look for that lowercase ILM. I'm going to search within customer table within the customer column. I'm going to start at the first position, and then if a value is not found, we're going to put a 0 in there. And then I'm going to hit enter. All right. So now if I zoom back out and we zoom over to the right, we can look at the differences between these two kind of side by side. Notice that the search function found an ILM, whereas the find function did not. Once again, we have a discrepancy. Once again, we have a discrepancy. Down here, we can tell that that must have been a lowercase ILM because they both found the value. And we know that find would not have found the value unless it was a lowercase ILM because it was case sensitive. So that's just the difference between the two. If you're curious, when do I use one compared to the other? When you do that is based on the, and let's see, here's that one that had a lowercase ILM in it right there in Ohio there. Had a lowercase ILM right there. The difference is based on case sensitivity. If you want it to be case sensitive, then you can go ahead and go with the find function. If you want it to be non-case sensitive, then you would go with the search function. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create another example here. In this next example, we're going to use the length function. The length function returns a number of characters in a text string. So that was one that was not in our PowerPoint slide. But we're going to use that again on our customer table here. So I'm going to go up here to the top and click New Calculated Column. This one will be called Function Length. We'll zoom in there. And then I'm going to type in length. And then I'm going to put this just simply on the customer and then the customer. And what this will return is the total length of each one of these customer columns here. And you don't see this yet, but all of these different expressions that we're working on, we're going to kind of nest these all together for one kind of completion here in a few moments. But this is going to return the length of the full expression. So then I hit enter. Then I'm going to navigate back over to the right again and then zoom in. And you'll see that the length of each one of those is a little bit different. So it's counting the number of characters and telling us the length of each one of those columns. All right, or each row within that column. All right, so I'll zoom back out. That's the function length, or the length function. The next thing I want to show you is now that we have the length, we can actually remove specified characters. So we could go in there and say, hey, I want to remove all the characters where the ILM value here, right? So I might want to do something like this. I might want to say I only want to return the characters after the letter ILM occurs. So I would have to take the length function and then subtract that from the search function. All right, so now we would get into the point of these kind of nested function calls. All right, so I'm going to create a new calculated column here. This one here will be called function length minus mid. So I'm going to minus the mid function. And then for the length here, I'm just going to bring in customer and then customer column again. And then what I want to do is I want to subtract the result of the mid function. So I'm going to bring in mid, and then I'm going to, the text I'm going to look for here is actually going to be an open parenthesis. So I'm going to look for that first open parenthesis that is occurring in Tailspin Toys. And then I'm going to say the start position is going to be starting from 1. And then the number here, the number of characters, we're just going to go ahead and put, something in there like 0. All right. So all I want to do is determine where is the starting position of, actually it's not mid, it should be find here, right? Sorry about that. So I'm doing search. I thought that looked incorrect. So I'm going to search for the open parenthesis. I'm going to start within the text I want to search within is customer, and then I'm going to start from 1. And if it's not found, we're going to just return a 0 there. All right, and this would be search. Okay, so now when I hit enter here, what this returns, if we go over here to the right, is it returns the length minus the search, meaning how many characters are there after the open parenthesis occurs. So there's 12 characters in this one, 12, 12, so on and so forth, all the way down. So what we're going to try to do here is essentially, and that's the wrong one, what we're going to do here is we're going to try to extract the city and the state from the customer name. So let's just imagine for a moment we don't have the city and the state. We want to extract that out. So that's what we're walking through here with this example. So first I get the length of the entire thing, which is maybe 27. Then I say go ahead and subtract wherever that first opening parenthesis starts, which might have been 12. So we drop that off. And then we know that the remaining number of characters is 17. So now we can nest that function that we just created. We can nest that inside of another function. All right, so we want to go ahead and extract the city and the state from the customer column. So what we're going to do is create another calculated column here. All right, so I'm going to return to a previous function that we were working with here. And this was the very first function that we did, right? We returned the first 3 characters of the customer name. And what we want to do is use those functions that we just created, and we want to replace the hard-coded value here with those expressions that we were just working with. So for the starting position, for example, if I'm trying to return just the city and the state here of our different customers, then what I want to do is I want to look for the open parenthesis. And after we get to the open parenthesis there, we want to start one digit past the open parenthesis. So we'll go back over to function mid. I don't know why it keeps sliding over like that. Oh, because it's here, it's making it pull up. So we're going to replace that one value. So I'm going to comment that out, and then we're going to go ahead and use the search function here. So I'm going to type in search, open parenthesis. We know that we're searching for the open parenthesis there. We're going to search for that within customer and then customer table. And then we're going to start from position 1. If it's not found, we'll return it with a 0 and then comma. So now this gives us a dynamic starting position. Now the only thing we're missing here is we actually need to add 1 to it because we don't want to start with the open parenthesis. We want to start one digit past that. For the 3 at the bottom, we don't want to return 3 characters. We want to return the entire city and state, which is dynamic. It's going to change based on each one. So for that one there, we're going to use the length function that we used a moment ago. So I'm going to say length, and then I'm going to get the text from customer table, customer column, close that up, and then we're going to subtract from that using the search function again. The text we want to find is that open parenthesis, and then within the open parenthesis, we're going to search the customer table. We're going to start at 1, and if it's not found, we will return a 0. This one has to subtract 1. All right, so we want to subtract 1. The reason we want to subtract 1 here is because we want to get rid of this closing parenthesis on the end. So every one of these has a closing parenthesis. We want to get rid of that. So we're going to subtract 1 on the end here. So now it's dynamic. The starting position is dynamic, the ending position is dynamic, and this should return our city state. So I'll go ahead and hit enter here, and then we'll zoom back out. We can scroll all the way over to the right. Oh, it's right here, function mid. We can zoom back in, and now we see the city and state has been extracted from each one of the customer names. And we did that by very simply using just a series of different string functions that are available to us inside of the DAX language. And if you're familiar at all with Excel, then these functions should have looked very similar to you, very easy to pick up and learn. If you're familiar with T-SQL, you have a lot of the same functionality here inside of T-SQL as well.